Rain fell like a curtain drawn over the earth, thick and relentless, soaking the plains until even the cattle had gone silent. The storm had been building all day, a heavy weight in the air that made the horses restless and the dogs whimper. But Caleb Dornay didn't move. He knelt in the mud by the broken fence, his hat low, the brim dripping steadily onto the ground. The cold didn't bother him anymore. Not since that night, the night everything burned. He lifted his gaze toward the hills where two small crosses leaned against the crooked oak. They were just shadows now through the mist, but he didn't need to see them to feel them. Eliza and little Tommy. His wife's laughter used to fill the yard like sunlight. His boy's boots used to thump down the porch steps every morning before dawn. Those sounds were gone now. Only the wind remained, whispering through the grass like ghosts that couldn't rest. Caleb's hands clenched around the fence post. He was a man made of few words and fewer smiles. His neighbors in Three Pines used to say he was carved out of the same rock as the Montana hills. But even stone cracks when you heat it long enough. The fire that took his family had done just that. It cracked something deep inside him. A letter had arrived 3 days ago, left on his porch without a knock. The handwriting was shaky, the paper smudged with dirt and tears. Greater than, Caleb, please, I beg you. Meet me at your ranch before sundown. There's something you don't know. He knew the handwriting. It belonged to Eli Harper, his former ranch hand. A man he once trusted like a brother. A man who vanished the same night his house went up in flames. Folks said Eli ran off because of guilt. Caleb never asked why. He already believed he knew. The locket found in Eli's saddlebag, the one Eliza wore every day, was all the proof he'd needed. Now, as thunder rolled over the horizon, Caleb heard the faint, uneven rhythm of hoofbeats approaching. His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't reach for his gun right away, but his hand stayed close. The sound drew nearer until a rider emerged through the rain, hunched low over his horse. Eli Harper. The man looked older, thinner, as if the months had scraped him down to the bone. He dismounted slowly, every move hesitant, like someone stepping on thin ice. Caleb, he called, voice hoarse from the cold and fear. I came, like I said. Caleb rose, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the flash of lightning. He didn't answer right away. His silence was worse than anger. It was the kind that made men's hearts shrink in their chests. Explain yourself, he said finally, voice low and steady. Eli swallowed hard, water dripping from his coat. I didn't start that fire, Caleb. I swear on everything I got left. Caleb took one slow step forward. You expect me to believe that? When I found her locket in your pack the next morning. Eli's lips trembled. I took it because I thought she was gone. I was trying to save something. Anything, from the fire. She dropped it when what? Caleb cut him off, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. When I went back for her, Eli said, his voice breaking. You weren't there. You'd gone to town, remember? She told me Sheriff Dalton came by that morning, threatening her again about the deed. She was scared, Caleb. She said he wanted the land and he'd do anything to get it. Caleb's eyes flickered, but he stayed silent. I was helping her pack, Eli went on, voice trembling as he tried to speak through the rain and memory. She said she was leaving with Tommy for a few days, until you cooled down enough to face Dalton. I told her I'd get the horses ready. But when I came back, his voice cracked. The barn was already burning. I ran inside, but the roof was coming down. I tried, God, I tried, but I couldn't reach them. Caleb's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. You expect me to believe the sheriff did this? Eli nodded quickly. Dalton was drunk that night. He came by later, after it was done. He said, should have sold when you had the chance. He told me to keep quiet or I'd hang for it. Then he rode out before dawn. That's why I left. I thought if I stayed, he'd kill me too. The rain grew heavier, hammering the barn roof behind them. Caleb stared at him, his mind a storm fiercer than the one outside. Dalton Price had always been trouble. Everyone in town knew he was a bully with a badge, but no one had dared cross him. Caleb had done it once, refused to sell his ranch when Dalton wanted the land for cattle drives. He remembered the sheriff's parting words clearly, careful, Dornay. Pride burns faster than wood. Now those words came back like smoke in his lungs. Show me proof, Caleb said at last. Eli hesitated, then turned toward the barn. I kept something. I didn't know how to tell you before, but it's still here. They walked together through the storm, the sound of their boots lost in the thunder. Inside the barn, Shadows danced against the wooden walls. It smelled of wet hay and ashes. Caleb hadn't been in there since the fire. Half the roof was gone, and every step stirred old pain. Eli went to the far corner, knelt, and pulled up a loose board. From beneath it, he drew out a small metal box, blackened at the edges. He pried it open with shaking fingers. Inside were a few burned papers, a silver badge, and a photograph. Caleb took the photo, holding it close to the lantern light. It was Eliza, smiling faintly beside Sheriff Dalton Price. Her hand rested on a document, a deed. Caleb's stomach turned. She came to me after that photo, Eli said quietly. Said she didn't trust him anymore. He promised to protect her and Tommy if she convinced you to sell. But when she refused, he lost his temper. That's when she decided to leave. Caleb stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. He could almost hear Eliza's voice, soft, worried, asking him not to fight again. Let's just start over, she'd said that last morning. We can be happy anywhere. But he'd been stubborn, too proud to see the danger coming. Eli knelt in the mud, eyes glistening. I know you hate me, Caleb. Maybe you should, but I'm not your enemy. He is. For a long moment, neither man moved. The wind howled through the cracks in the barn walls, the lantern flame flickering between them. Then Caleb straightened slowly, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip, not to draw, but to feel the weight of the choice ahead. Where is he? Caleb asked, his voice flat. Eli hesitated. Dry Creek. Got himself promoted after the fire. Runs the whole damn valley now. Caleb turned toward the open door, rain splashing against his boots. The air outside smelled of mud and justice. Then I'm riding at dawn. Caleb, Eli started, but the rancher cut him off with a hard glance. Don't follow me, Eli. You've done your part. He walked out into the storm, the wind tearing at his coat, the thunder rumbling like an old god waking up. Behind him, Eli stood in the doorway, watching the figure disappear into the rain. Somewhere on the hill behind the ranch, the oak tree creaked in the wind over two small graves. Caleb stopped for a moment, lifting his eyes toward them. His lips moved, though no sound came out. Then he whispered, barely audible beneath the rain, Eliza, Tommy, I'll make it right. The next flash of lightning showed his face, hard, determined, stripped of anything soft that once lived in him. The storm didn't slow him. It followed him, rolling across the land as if it belonged to him. Now, and somewhere in that dark distance lay Dry Creek, and the man who had started it all. The sun broke over the horizon with a pale, uncertain light, spreading long shadows across the plains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed raw and quiet. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke, the kind that never really left Caleb's lungs since the night his home burned. He sat on the edge of his bunk inside the barn, staring at the revolver laid out before him. The steel gleamed faintly in the morning light, cold and honest. He had oiled it, loaded it, checked it twice. Beside it, a small photograph of Eliza and Tommy was tucked into his coat pocket. He touched it with his calloused fingers, a brief, wordless prayer passing through him. There was no righteousness left in this, only necessity. Eli stood in the doorway, head in his hands. He hadn't slept. His face was pale, hollow, filled with a quiet dread. You sure about this, Caleb? He asked softly. Caleb didn't look up. Ain't much to be sure about anymore. You could take it to the law in Bozeman, Eli urged. They'd listen if you showed them the proof. Caleb slid the revolver into his holster and finally met Eli's eyes. The law. Dalton is the law down there. Men like him don't face justice, they hand it out. Eli opened his mouth to argue, but Caleb was already walking toward his horse, the mud sucking at his boots. The sky was streaked with gold and gray, and the wind had shifted east, pushing him toward Dry Creek as if the land itself wanted this finished. They rode in silence for miles, the rhythmic beat of hooves cutting through the stillness. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with the black remains of old brush fires and the occasional carcass of a fence long abandoned. Every mile closer to Dry Creek, Caleb felt the weight of the past pressing harder against his chest. By midday, they reached the ridge overlooking the town. Dry Creek was smaller than he remembered, just a string of wooden buildings leaning against the wind. But even from here, he could see the glint of the sheriff's star pinned to the man standing outside the office, barking orders at a couple of deputies. Dalton Price. Caleb's grip on the reins tightened. The man looked older, thicker around the middle, but his posture was the same, cocky, cruel, certain that no one would dare challenge him. You can turn back, Caleb said quietly. Ain't your fight no more. Eli shook his head. It was always my fight. I should have stopped him that night. Caleb didn't answer. His eyes never left Dalton. He nudged his horse forward, the sound of hooves echoing down the empty street as the townsfolk turned to look. Windows shuttered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men in front of the saloon froze with their cards in hand. Everyone in Dry Creek knew the name Caleb Dornay. Everyone knew the story of the fire. Dalton noticed the silence before he saw Caleb. When he did, the smirk on his face faltered just slightly. Well, he drawled, stepping down from the porch. Look what the wind blew in. Caleb Dornay, the ghost of 3 Pines. Caleb dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. You talk too easy for a man who's done what you've done. Dalton's smile returned, smaller, sharper. You been listening to that runaway hand of yours, huh? Harper's always been full of stories. Maybe you oughta think before repeating them. Caleb stepped closer, close enough to see the twitch in the sheriff's jaw. Eli's got proof. So do I. You threatened my wife. You came to my land. You set that fire when she refused to sell. The street had gone deathly quiet. Dalton's deputies shifted uneasily but didn't move. Dalton forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You think anyone here's gonna believe that? You're just a bitter old rancher clinging to ghosts. You got no witnesses, no cause. I got her name carved into the back of your badge, Caleb said, cutting him off. He pulled something from his pocket and tossed it into the dirt between them, the blackened sheriff's badge from the metal box. Dalton's eyes flickered toward it, then back up to Caleb, and for the briefest second, his composure cracked. Caleb saw it, everyone saw it. Please, Dalton said, voice dropping. You don't know what you're doing. It was an accident. I didn't mean for anyone to die. Caleb's expression didn't change. His voice was low, steady, like distant thunder. You set a fire to scare her. You killed my wife and my boy. Don't tell me what you meant. Dalton's hand twitched toward his holster, but Caleb was already moving. The revolver came up fast, not to fire, just to remind the man what came next was his choice. The sound of the hammer clicking back echoed across the street. Go ahead, Caleb said softly. Reach for it. Dalton froze, sweat glistening at his temples. His deputies looked at one another but stayed rooted where they stood. No one dared to breathe. Please, Dalton whispered, his voice shaking now. I beg you. Those words, they cut through Caleb like a knife. Please, I beg you. He'd heard them before, on Eli's letter, on Eliza's lips the day she'd asked him not to ride into town and pick another fight. For a moment, he wasn't standing in the street, he was standing in his burned-down kitchen, hearing her voice again, soft and trembling. Please, Caleb, promise me you won't let anger be the only thing that lives in you. His grip on the gun trembled. For a heartbeat, he saw Dalton not as the monster he'd made him into, but as a man. Weak, flawed, desperate, the same kind of man who'd make a mistake and live to regret it. Caleb exhaled slowly and lowered the gun. The crowd gasped. Dalton blinked in disbelief. You don't deserve a bullet, Caleb said quietly. You'll live. You'll wake up every day knowing you took from me what can't ever be replaced. He stepped forward and swung the revolver's barrel into Dalton's jaw. The sound of bone cracking echoed off the saloon walls. Dalton hit the ground hard, blood spilling onto the dust. Caleb hit him again, once more, until the man was groaning, clutching his face. Then he stopped. He straightened, breathing hard, and tossed the badge onto the sheriff's chest. Your law dies here, he said. Dalton didn't speak. He just lay there, whimpering like a broken animal. Caleb turned to the deputies. If you've got any decency left, you'll see him stand trial in Bozeman. Tell the truth this time. The men nodded mutely. No one dared to challenge him. Eli walked up beside him, his face pale with shock. You didn't kill him, he said softly. After everything, Caleb holstered the gun. I came here for justice, not to become the man I hate. He mounted his horse, the sun catching the brim of his hat as he looked one last time at Dalton sprawled in the dust. He'll answer for it, Caleb said. But I won't lose myself to it. Eli climbed onto his horse beside him. Together they rode out of Dry Creek, the silence between them no longer heavy with anger but with something quieter, peace, maybe, or something close to it. The road stretched long and golden before them, leading back toward the valley, toward the graves on the hill and the ranch waiting to be reborn. When they reached the ridge, Caleb stopped. He turned in the saddle to look back at the town, now small and distant under the wide blue sky. You think she'd forgive me? He asked softly. Eli looked down, then back at him. I think she already has. Caleb nodded once, his throat tight. The wind carried the smell of wild sage and rain, brushing against his face like a whisper. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like ghosts were following him. He looked toward the horizon. Come on, he said quietly. There's work to do. As they rode north, the plains shimmered with sunlight. The storm was gone, the land alive again. And somewhere, far off beyond the hills, it seemed as though a woman's voice drifted with the wind, soft, gentle, forgiving.